Hey guys, welcome back to the Self Indulgent Podcast. I am your host, Mariah. How are you guys? I have had quite the week, lots of things going on. I'm happy to be here. It is the last week of February that I'm currently filming this. I feel like 2 episodes ago, I've just put out a February check in for the end of January. We won't be doing a check in for necessarily the month of February, but I urge you all to check in with yourselves even though February went by like this. What are some of my highlights from February? Kendrick. All things Kendrick. Those are my highlights. That's what I try to let take up brain space in this dumpster fire that we are in currently. What is your highlight of the month as we are wrapping up here? Happy thoughts, positive thoughts. Next week, I am going to visit my best friend for spring break. I'm very excited about that. I have found myself in the mood to lock in to some of my health related goals for the summer. It's time to lock in. I'm ready to do it. That is where my mind is right now. And so, with that, I've been reflecting a lot on this ideal version of self and what stops us from connecting to that. Because I think the last episode, I might mention this in a lot of episodes, but the concept that your ideal self is very much your present self. You have the ideal self within you, and that's a choice that you're making moment to moment. This version of yourself is going to be the one to get you there. You can't get to where you're going without your present self. So we got to be loving and kind to this present self, right? These are things that you've heard me talk about already. And so, in reflecting more on that, I have this last week and a half started going live on YouTube on here. And I fought myself for this for a long time. This is something that I avoided doing. And I had to finally get curious and ask myself, why was I avoiding it? Like, what was the problem? And I started asking myself, like, is this something that you want to do? Like, is this something that this ideal version of self, when they go about their day and engage in the community, is this something you want to do? And the answer was yes. And I had so much resistance. And I'm like, why? Where is this resistance coming from? Like, what is the avoidance? And it comes back to this fear of being seen, which is so interesting because I think I did a whole episode on something similar to this last year. I don't remember what it was called, and I don't remember exactly what I discussed in there. Authenticity. It was an episode on authenticity. And I was talking about why we struggle to be our authentic selves. I just briefly talked about the fear of being seen. It's something we've been seeing a lot on social media. That was at play in why I was avoiding going on live. It hit me that I have these visions of what this journey will look like for me, where I want to go, how I want it to look, the type of community I want, and the engagement and being present. And I realized that I have all those visions and feel comfortable in that, but then I won't be comfortable going on live for 10 minutes. There was a stark misalignment there, right? Because it's like, what is making me so anxious if I can't get on YouTube and go on live or any of these social media platforms and go on live now? Why would I be, what makes me think that I'll be able to handle it in the future when I hit the goal, right? Like, if I can't do it now, I'm not setting myself up for all those things that I'm dreaming about to manifest. Does that make sense? It really helped me become more aware of how we get in our own way. And so, digging more, obviously, I uncovered this fear of being seen, which is something I have to get over. If I want to do this and I want to engage more with people and I want people to get to know me, and I have to get over that. I have to work with it. And it's not to say that I'm going to completely dispel it forever, but it's something I really have to work with. So yeah, I want to talk more about that today and what it means to explore how we get in our own way, right? And I think oftentimes this is what people mean when they say we need to lean into the fear of discomfort. I literally had a moment where I started to ask myself, what if this is what if this is the path, the next part of your journey? What if this is the next part of the path and you're actively choosing to avoid it? taking away a potential opportunity and not even giving it a chance. And I think that I'm realizing that that's what happens a lot of the time for a lot of us. We don't lean into novelty. We don't lean into the newness of things. And it's so funny because we want change, we want change, we want change, and we hate how things are, but then we don't commit to doing something different. And it's largely because the body, we avoid pain and seek pleasure. That's just the way the brain works. When there's discomfort and you feel it in the body, if you're in a survival state, like we've talked about, it's going to urge you and push you to whatever your default survival state is, whether that be fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. We talked about that in another episode if you wanted to go back to that, where I talked about the nervous system in detail. And so before I come back to ways to get out of our own way, ways to challenge ourselves, and examining that a little bit more, I want to explore this idea of change a little bit more, because our circumstances influence heavily what we do in our lives. But I want to explore change more. I went live last night and did this mini book club. It was just something I was trying where I talk about the book. And it actually it was so funny. The page that I ended up opening to, where I had some highlights, is like perfect for what I had planned on talking about today. The book is called The Courage to Be Disliked. And it is the section of the book title of the title of the section is People Always Choose Not to Change. I urge you, if you are feeling discomfort in hearing that statement, to get curious. If you're getting frustrated or activated by hearing that, I would get more curious and, sit with yourself about what is activating you. What about that is frustrating? What about that is making you feel things, right? And so this whole book is basically this back and forth between a philosopher and this person that is labeled youth. And it's a dialogue. It's back and forth. They're just having conversations throughout the entire book where this kid is challenging this philosopher on his principles. And this philosopher follows Adlerian psychology, which is from this psychologist from back in the day who had a very specific way of viewing things and understanding how humans work in the mind. And so this philosopher heavily takes on this type of psychological approach and how they view life. That's just a disclaimer. So when I say things like, I don't want to get too heady. That's not the point of this. But the concept directly, I think, relates to what we're talking about today. And so in the beginning of this chapter, the philosopher challenged the youth, because earlier in a different chapter, the youth had said that any person's disposition or personality cannot be changed. And he wants to challenge that. And so in Adlerian psychology, we describe personality and disposition with the word lifestyle, which is just like mind blown to me. The philosopher says, lifestyle is the tendencies of thought and action in life. And I'm going to pause here because that is huge for me anyway, to conceptualize personality differently. So he's basically saying that somebody's disposition, the way that they exist in the world, and personality can be viewed as the way they exist in the world, the way they show up, these traits. They are you could replace those words with lifestyle, which is not something that we think of, right? Because when you think of lifestyle, I think people are more accepting of like, oh, you can change your lifestyle, right? That's like a little bit more malleable. But when we talk about personality and disposition, we talk about it in a very fixed way. And so the philosopher is saying that no, personality and disposition are actually the same as lifestyle, because lifestyle is just tendencies of thought and action in one's life, which is the same as a personality. Tendencies of one's thoughts and actions, right? So your thoughts and actions directly impact the way you show up in the world, or what one could say personality, and therefore it is the same. Already mind blown, right? So then the philosopher continues and says, how one sees the world and how one sees oneself is lifestyle. Think of lifestyle as a concept bringing together these ways of finding meaning. In a narrow sense, lifestyle could be defined as someone's personality. Taken more broadly, it is a word that encompasses the worldview of the person and his or her outlook on life. And so we're bridging this gap between personality and lifestyle, which are both, at the end of the day, somebody's worldview, somebody's perception of self, somebody's perception of the world. And both of those things impact how you show up, right? Which would therefore impact the type of lifestyle you choose. But when we think about personality, we don't think about choices. We think of it as fixed. So I'm going to continue with that. So the philosopher says, say there's someone who worries about him and says, I am a pessimist. One could rephrase that to instead say, I have a pessimistic view of the world. You could consider that the issue is not personality, but rather the view of the world. It seems that the word personality is nuanced and suggests being unchangeable. But if we're talking about a view of the world, then that should be possible to alter. I really appreciate this breakdown because now we're talking about identity, right? Like identity politics and the ways in which identity really we attach to these traits of self sometimes. Like I've talked about in one of my first podcast episodes, my break from this hood mindset. Again, I disclaim that I'm not talking about those who have been horrifically victimized and survivors of abuse and things like that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about this victimhood mindset. Woe is me. Everybody is out to get me. Nobody cares about me. And it kind of stuck in that cycle and not able to take accountability for self and one's life. Some people identify with that and it totally impacts the way they exist in this world, which would impact their ability to change. Instead of saying, I am a pessimist, saying, I have a pessimistic worldview, it creates separation from this identity that I feel fixed into, oh, it's just my worldview that is pessimistic. I myself am not pessimistic. Right now, this is my worldview. We can allow for change, but when we start to identify with things and say, I am, words are powerful, right? It really kind of limits one's experience because that's all they can see now. I'm a pessimist. That's all I see now. Why lock ourselves into that so fixed and in a box, right? Like I don't like being in a box, which is so funny. Whoa, okay, I'm sorry. We're having revelations here. Because my last therapy session, my therapist eats me up every week. She really does. She really gets in there. We started talking about something that I didn't even think we were going to go, but she brought up, and this has come up before. A few years ago, it was a big deal. I talked a lot about it with my best friend. Essentially, what the therapist recognized was that, you know what it kind of sounds like your role is, and you're not going to like this. And I was like, what? I played dumb because I knew where she was going. She was like, you sound like the leader, like the initiator. Like when you talk about how you want to move through things and how you think things should go and the passion you have behind it, like you're the leader. And when I tell y'all, I have such resistance to be labeled as the leader. And we started unpacking that more, right? Like there's lots of reasons why I don't like being seen as the leader. Growing up, I think there's lots of message, like nobody likes the leader. In the Powerpuff Girls, I didn't want to be Blossom. I wanted to be Bubbles or Buttercup. I'm also a Virgo, so there's also leadership energy in being a Virgo as well that people talk about. And I think nobody likes the leader. The leader isn't fun and it's exhausting. People don't appreciate it. They forget about the leader. So, like, all of these preconceived notions, right? So, there's twofold here, right? There's this leader identity that I am averse to. But then it's also my view of what it means to be a leader is also creating an aversive experience. Why not say, I have leader qualities and I can be all these other things? I don't want to be put into a box. In this society, that's what we do. We put ourselves into these boxes, and these are one of the ways in which that we get in our own way. So I say all that to say I can reframe what it means to be a leader. My view of what a leader is can shift. And I don't have to let it be all these preconceived notions that I have about what it is to be a leader because it's changeable, right? Even these identities that we heavily, or these labels that we put on ourselves, they're changeable. They do not have to be fixed. We have just been dealing with them in a very fixed way instead of allowing for uncertainty. So we'll get to uncertainty in a second. I hope all of that made sense. So then the youth responds to that and says, this is kind of confusing. When you speak of a lifestyle, do you mean a way of living? And the philosopher says, yes, you could put it that way. To be a little more accurate, it is the way one's life should be. You probably think of disposition or personality as something with which you are endowed, without any connection to your will. In Adlerian psychology, however, lifestyle is thought of as something that you choose for yourself. So we're saying that in this realm of psychology, people think that their personality is something that is put onto them. Like they are kind of almost in a sense born this way. This is who I am, right? This is how I respond to things. This is just me. And in this psychology, he's saying that actually, if we're saying that personality is the same thing as lifestyle you very much choose. You actually get to choose that for yourself. You can choose how you show up in the world and how you view the world. We are actively choosing that. And I think about all the messaging we get, right? Like older people are stuck in their ways. They're less likely to change. And there's some science, I think, and reason behind why that is, in terms of your brain being fully developed and all this stuff. There's still neuroplasticity, but how much of that is there later in life? Right now, we're talking about this want to change. This is what the youth is talking about. The youth earlier in the book is saying, I don't like how I am, and I do deeply want to change. I try to change, it doesn't work, so I can't change. This is who I am. And he is arguing that this is not true. If you're choosing to be this way, you're choosing this personality and lifestyle. The philosopher had said lifestyle is thought of as something that you choose for yourself. The youth said that you choose for yourself. The philosopher says, yes, exactly. You choose your lifestyle. So not only did I choose to be unhappy, but I even went so as far as to choose this warped personality too, is the youth is asking. I'm going to repeat that. The youth asked, after the philosopher said, you choose your lifestyle, the youth said, so not only did I choose to be unhappy, but I even went as far as to choose this warped personality too? The philosopher said, absolutely. The youth said, now you're really pushing it. When I became aware, I already had this personality. I certainly don't have any recollection of having chosen it. But it's the same for you, isn't it? Being able to choose one's own personality at will. Now that sounds like you're talking about robots, not people. And the philosopher says, of course you did not consciously choose this kind of self. Your first choice was probably unconscious, combined with external factors you have referred to, that is, race, nationality, culture, and the home environment. These certainly had a significant influence on that choice. Nevertheless, it is you who chose this kind of self. And I appreciate this acknowledgement of race, identity, like these other identity dimensions, culture, these intersectionalities, and the home environment. But he's saying that as though those have super strong influence, but the influence that it has is on your choice. You still have choice, right? So I think of people who are like, when we think of people, wow, you went through all that. How are you still so kind? That's a choice. But what we say instead is that, oh, it's just who they are. I could never. That's just who they are. They just have a high tolerance for this, and it's just in their being. It's fixed. I could never do that. Is that true? It's up to what you believe. But when we think about, again, let's come back to this idea that like we are saying, a lot of us here, if you're watching this podcast, I'm sure you have some desire to change in some aspect, and it doesn't happen, and you're like, what the fuck? Why can't I do, like, we're talking about wanting to change and not changing, and then we allow for this concept of like, oh, maybe this is just who I am, I have to settle for this. And that's painful, and that's not fair to self. We allow that entrapment to happen, even though the desire change. And so if you did want to change and be the more calm person and have been through all these things, but still show up in a loving, compassionate, kind way, like in the example of that person who's like, how do you do that? I can't do that. How are you so kind and calm after all you've been through? Oh, it must just be how you were just, this is just how you are. No, like you can also show up that way. You're choosing not to. You don't know what it takes for that person to do that. You don't know if maybe they've learned how to self-regulate over time. Maybe they have learned how to be safe in oneself. I think we kind of give up easy. You don't know the amount of work that person might have done to be able to show up that way. And they choose anyway. It can be really hard. They're still choosing to show up that way, right? It's not just this autopilot necessarily life that we are all living. I think we have more active choice than I think we admit to ourselves. And so the youth responds, I don't get what you're saying. How on earth could I have chosen it? The philosopher says, Adlerian psychology's view is that it happens around the age of 10. So now we're talking about development, right? And so the youth says, well, for argument's sake, and now I'm really going out on a limb, say that when I was 10, I unconsciously made this choice of lifestyle or whatever. Would that even matter? You can call it personality or disposition or lifestyle, but regardless, I had already become this kind of self. The state of things doesn't change at all. The philosopher says that is not true. If your lifestyle is not something that you were naturally born with, but something you chose yourself, then it must be possible to choose it over again. The youth says, now you're saying I can choose it all over? The philosopher says, maybe you haven't been aware of your lifestyle until now, and maybe you haven't been aware of the concept of lifestyle either. Of course, no one can choose his or her own birth. Being born in this country, in this era, and with these parents are things you did not choose. And all of these things have a great deal of influence. From a spirituality perspective, I could argue that, depending on your beliefs, you might believe that you did choose this life when you came here, when your spirit came here, but that's not what this episode's about. So we're going to gloss over that. But all those things have a great deal of influence. You'll probably face disappointment and start looking at other people and feeling, I'd wish I'd been born in their circumstances, but you can't let it end there. The issue is not the past, but here in the present. And now you've learned about lifestyle. But what you do with it from here on is your responsibility. Whether you go on choosing the lifestyle you've had up until now or you choose a new lifestyle altogether, it's entirely up to you. Where was I at the age of 10, right? If we're going to take their developmental timeline here. At the age of 10, I was in middle school, question mark? Yeah, because I was turning 13. 10, I was like fifth or sixth grade. So that's a big deal, right? Because we're talking about getting ready for puberty. We're talking about social dynamic shifting in a fifth or sixth grade time period. I'm thinking about how what I really wanted was friends. I wanted people to like me. I also developed this idea that I needed to be good. I needed to do good. I needed to get good grades. I needed the teacher to like me. I needed to be the goody two shoes. I think that was the identity that I developed. And that followed me for a very long time. It still comes up today. It's still like, it still bothers me. I was the kid in the class that if the teacher even had to address me for anything, I would start getting emotional. I would start crying, not like loudly sobbing. I would definitely try to hide it because then you're asking for abuse from kids if you do that. I never at the time understood, obviously, like I wasn't super explorative. I was just like, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. And I was just upset and I never explored why it was that I was crying. What was the actual issue? Why was I so upset that I had did something wrong? And I think it's interesting in how like I wasn't showing myself that I had to be whatever I needed to be liked, right? And if there was something I would get made fun of for, I would hide it. I wouldn't talk about it anymore. Or I would sacrifice self sometimes in order to fit in and be part of the joke. Became a very masked version of myself at a young age. And so I think about how that shows up now in what we're talking about, like the fear of being seen. And so it's like I kind of adopted this personality of hiding in certain ways and taking a step back and no longer, because I used to be the one to volunteer to read. I was the first one to want to present and stuff like that. That changed dramatically once I got to middle school. Dramatically, I hid. That was not it. It was not socially acceptable. I ended up looking weird. I think too about some of the leader qualities, to be the first to volunteer, to be the first to do this, to help the teacher and all that. And how there's such a dislike for it now based on my experiences. was interesting to see what we choose for ourselves. And then I started to choose to hide self in a lot of different ways. And I chose to not be seen anymore. Like I chose to be seen less. And I continue to do so in the delay of allowing myself to kind of cultivate this community online for people to get to know me, and even inhibiting myself from making videos and going on live and psyching myself out for years on this platform. There's choice and influence, the influence of being made fun of and all of these things. And then I chose to not suffer through that and hide. And it continues to be a choice without recognizing it as that until thinking about these types of things that we're talking about today. And so then the youth says, then how do I choose again? You're telling me you choose that lifestyle yourself. So go ahead and select a new one instantly. But there's no way I can just change on the spot. The philosopher says, yes, you can. People can change at any time, regardless of the environments they are in. You are unable to change only because you are making the decision not to. The youth says, what do you mean exactly? The philosopher says, people are constantly selecting their lifestyles. Right now, while we are having this tit for tat, when we are selecting ours, you describe yourself as an unhappy person. You say that you want to change right this minute. You even claim that you want to be reborn as a different person. After all that, then why are you still unable to change? Is it because you are making the persistent decision not to change your lifestyle? It is because you are making the persistent decision not to change your lifestyle. The youth says, no, don't you see that's completely illogical? I do want to change. That is my sincere wish. So how could I be making the decision not to? The philosopher says, although there are some small inconveniences and limitations, you probably think that the lifestyle you have now is the most practical one, and that it's easier to leave things as they are. If you stay just like this, experience enables you to respond properly to events as they occur, while guessing the results of one's actions. You could say it's like driving your old familiar car. It might rattle a bit, but one can take that into account and maneuver easily. On the other hand, if one chooses a new lifestyle, no one can predict what might happen to the new self or have any idea of how to deal with events as they arise. It will be hard to see ahead to the future, and life will be filled with anxiety. A more painful and unhappy life might lie ahead. Simply put, people have various complaints about things, but it's easier and more secure to just be the way one is. Earlier, when I was talking about uncertainty, this is what I was talking about. This really ate me the fuck up. I'm not gonna lie to you. I don't know how it's hitting for y'all, but the way that this hits for me, and mind you, this was like 3 pages. This was like 3 actual physical pages to flip. There's more concepts in this book. I'm not even halfway through this book. Actually, I am halfway through this book. The concepts are just so much to take in. I'm just overwhelmed. I'm just like, what the hell? The way that this particular part ate me up, I just think about all the time. Like, it really begs the question, are you really ready to change? If you have not changed yet, the answer is no. It requires a lot to change, but it is a choice nonetheless. You are holding yourself in captivity. Nobody else is. This is how we are in our own ways. We like to be comfortable. It is easier to do things in this autopilot life because you know what's coming. You know how you're going to handle it. For me, if I have a bad week, the worst I know that's going to happen is I'm going to crash out on the couch, eat a bunch of junk food, be sick about it for a few days, go back to the gym, and then repeat that cycle and not get on a consistent path. It's just, whew, I'm sorry. I had to sit with that. So the youth responds, one wants to change, but changing is scary? Question mark. The philosopher says, when we try to change our lifestyles, we put our great courage to the test. There is the anxiety generated by changing and the disappointment attendant to not changing. I am sure you have selected the latter. The youth says, wait, just now you used the word courage. The philosopher said, yes, Adlerian psychology is a psychology of courage. Your unhappiness cannot be blamed on your past or your environment. And it isn't that you lack competence, you just lack courage. One might say you are lacking in the courage to be happy. Wow, this shit hits every time I read it. This is the third time I've read this section. This is it. This is it, guys. This is part of the answer as to why we get in our own way and why we do not change in the ways that we feel we are capable of. Let's get a little spiritual and talk about this misalignment that happens and the discomfort. So for me, I think the more aware you are of what you desire, the more aware you are of your purpose, the closer you feel connected to that. It becomes uncomfortable to not lean into that, right? So then you have this dissonance. You're fighting between the version of self who has been living the way they've been living, has found a lot of comfort in that and knows how to maneuver that life, and is scared of having to completely rip apart their life and it look completely different, because now we're talking about all kinds of changes, because when you change, your environment changes at that, like, thing, everything is going to change at that point. And so, are you ready for that? That version of yourself is fighting with the higher self, your spirit, who the version of you that knows where they would like to go and what life could look like. If you believe in like the multiverse and another timeline, there's this version of you that already exists that is doing the thing. You have to choose to call that into your present reality. It is hard for all the reasons that I just read. And what's funny is, right, like, for me, I'm at a point where I'm anxious either fucking way. Like, I'm anxious now, doing the same things every day and not changing in the ways that I want to see. That makes me anxious too. So, why not be anxious and change? Like, yesterday, I made a commitment to myself that it's time to lock the fuck in for the summer. I have a retreat I want to go on. I am tired of feeling like shit. I'm tired of spending money on food, eating out rather. I'm tired of feeling the way that I feel physically. I know what I need to do to not feel that way. So it's time to lock the fuck in. So I'm going to lock the fuck in. It's so funny to be here today talking about this, because this was just last night that it was just all sinking in. Maybe that's what people are talking about when they're receiving downloads. Like, maybe that's a little bit of what I was experiencing, because it's like a switch started to flicker. Like, somebody started fucking with the switch and it was like flickering on and off for a little bit. And then I was just like, no, we're going to turn it on. What are we going back and forth for? We're going to just turn it on. That's a choice. I'm choosing to turn the switch on and to listen to myself, one, and what I do want. It is a choice, and I'm choosing to not do that. And where we let our environment have too much of a say, we let the environment dictate what's happening. This is not to negate people who are, or invalidate people who are living in horrible environments. Like, it's a different topic. But for me, I'm in grad school right now. I have a lot of privilege, of course. And it has been a horrible experience. It has been my own personal dumpster fire. I can't wait to be done. We're getting closer. And it feels surreal. But I have, between that and doing internship and just feeling bad about myself, I have chosen to allow those circumstances that has fucked with my psyche. It has fucked with the way that I view myself. But again, I had to make what changed that for me to be where I am today, because I'm still in the dumpster fire. The dumpster fire has not stopped globally and in this program. I still feel the same way about it. But what has changed is these small choices I have made to connect with how I want to exist in this life, how I want to show up in this life. And those small changes have started to amount to different worldviews, different ways of looking at self, different ways of experiencing life, which has lessened the power that the environment has. And it has put a lot of the power back into my hands. And now that I am recognizing this power, this choice, it really is becoming clear to me, like, what I have to do. I keep saying I want these things. So what am I doing? Why am I doing things the same way? Hmm? Hmm? And courage is hard. Courage and confidence is hard. Have we done an episode on confidence? I've talked about confidence in episodes. I don't know that I've done a whole episode on confidence. I've struggled with this for so long. And let me tell you, the only way it is going to change and build is by you fucking around and finding out, is through action. Action is the only way you're going to build confidence, because in order to build confidence, you have to build self-trust. You have to build trust in self and continue to show yourself that you got your back, period, regardless of outcome. And as that strengthens, confidence strengthens. And this is where we come back to discernment, discipline, these conversations, because you are showing yourself that you will show up for yourself. And you're building that muscle, you're exercising that muscle so that you know how you want to continue to show up and to create the life that you want to create. And so this is why I think a lot of us, how we get in our own way. We are not making aligned choices. And a lot of it has to do with fear. And so as I come back to this idea of the fear of being seen, the fear of being seen directly impacts and fucks with my desires and dreams and goals. I have to lean into it. The thing that makes you uncomfortable and that you're scared of is usually the thing that you need to lean into and do anyway. And so I finally, coming back to coming on lives, Instagram and TikTok still terrify me. But baby steps. We're talking about baby steps. So I've gone live on YouTube this week. Honestly, it's only been a few days, actually. I'm talking about 2 weeks. I maybe went live once 1 week on YouTube and then didn't come back to it. But I've done a live a day for the last 3 days. And I'm going to continue to do that. These are ways that I can break the fear of being seen. Getting comfortable showing up on camera, getting comfortable being being authentic, just existing as who I am. And it's a direct challenge to the fear of being seen. And it is starting to get easier. YouTube feels a little lower stakes to me. Find what is low stakes to you. This does not have to be like super painful. Like for me, small steps has worked, because we're talking about changing, like to his point, yeah, I think he's right in that you can choose to change your entire personality. It's not easy though. There's nuance in that, in my opinion. I needed to take baby steps to be, and so I can build the confidence to sustain the consistency. That's another thing. How many times have I tried and stopped and tried and stopped and tried and stopped? It's always a journey, one. Like I think all of that was part of the journey as well. But you need to get real. If you're thinking about who you want to be, the change you want to make, these big dreams and visions and thoughts you have about your future and your desires, you need to get real about the baby steps. What are the actual baby steps that you're taking? The baby step needs to be enough, not too small of a step, but just enough to start to have some sort of momentum. And then as you start to do it and feel differently about it and really be present and exist in what it feels like, that is enough to grow the confidence and the consistency to say, hey, I can keep doing this, right? Instead of falling back into these old patterns. Like none of this is, I think, an overnight change. For some people it is though. It feels like that, like, or these overnight successes or these overnight people who just all of a sudden it's like, whoa, you're so different. No, there were steps behind that, but they finally got enough of the baby steps to get right up to the switch to say, oh, okay, we're going to turn the switch on. We're on now. This is who I am. You got to find the way to crawl to get there. You got to crawl there and then stand up and turn the switch on. We tend to see that piece of it, just not the baby steps that come before that. And it's not been an easy ride, right? And so I think at the end of the day, he is right in that. At the end of the day, we have a lot of choices to make. We make choices every day, regardless of how automatic some of them are. They're still choices. Even if it's one different choice a day, if you are trying to get somewhere, you have to start taking these little choices, regardless of what your mind is telling you. Last night, I was like, oh, I'm going to get on live. No, I'm not. Oh, I'm going to get on live. No, I'm not. I don't feel like it. I don't feel like it. The last episode, we talked about if you feel like it or not. You're fuck the if you feel like it, right? Because the feel like it, of course you're not going to feel like it. It's not something that you have done, but sometimes you might feel like it. But to use the I don't feel like it as the excuse, of course you don't. That's not your day to day. That's not your regular. That's not your norm. So why would you feel like it consistently? It's not about that. We got to move past the feeling like it. And I think it was last episode that I talked about this. So go listen to that. No, I asked myself, and I urge you guys to do this as well. The version of myself, the life that I'm trying to live, and the version of myself that I'm trying to connect with, would they do it? Yes. Immediate yes. Okay, so I'm going to do it. Fuck it. So I did it. And it was fine. I was like, oh, I'm tired. Like, I'm not in the mood. That was not true. Like, that actually was not true. And I felt more energized when I was done with it. I actually enjoyed doing it. And so it's funny how we will trick ourselves into choosing the same thing that did not get you where you wanted to go yesterday or the day before or the year before or the month before. We continue to make those choices. And so this is how we get in our own way. We are committed to the life that we are currently living. And there's lots of ways that we show ourselves that we're committed to the life that we're currently living in a day to day. And it makes sense. A lot of it is unconscious. But if you're ready to make a change, you got to find those little things that you can do on a day-to-day basis. You got to stop questioning yourself and just do anyway. And whatever you need to hold yourself accountable is whatever you need. You just got to fuck around and find out. That is what it is. That is literally all it is. And either you're ready for the change or you're not. It is a choice. It is a hard choice that I'm not going to argue. It is a very hard choice. But you got to decide if this is something you want to presently work for, especially if you are not happy and comfortable with who you are right now. I think that's all I had for today. Let me just check my little note that I was putting random thoughts on. The only thing I want to add is part of what was contributing to this fear of being seen and not fully engaging in the way that I want to engage is also this tendency to downplay self. I do that a lot. I downplay self in different ways that it shows up, whether that be, oh, I look crazy right now, I shouldn't be on camera, I don't actually have anything to talk about, nothing is coming to mind, I don't think I'm competent enough in this topic to talk about it. That's crazy. That is such a downplay of self. And I do that often. Like my personality, like I'm boring, my personality, I don't know how to show up on camera, I'm not interesting enough. And it's not even that I necessarily will say these things to myself directly. The messaging is there in the way that I exist and show up. The messaging is absolutely there. And so it completely impacts how I show up. I get in my own way through that. So stop downplaying yourself. We are our own worst critic, and I'm not going to get into that because I'm going to do a separate episode on that. We are our own worst critic. We got to let that go. We got to let that go. And we'll talk more about that in the next episode. But that's just something else that I was noticing in this fear of being seen and getting in our own way of like this downplay of self just feeds into doubt, not trusting self. These are also things that keep me from choosing to be different. So we gotta stop downplaying ourselves. We gotta lean into the things that we actually want to lean into and trust ourselves to be able to handle whatever comes with the newness, the uncertainty, the discomfort. That is how you build courage. You gotta start playing around, playing in the field, if you will. That is all I have to say for today. This is a little bit different. Oh, here's the book, The Courage to Be Disliked. In case you were interested in, there's a lot of topics. It's The Courage to Be Disliked, the Japanese phenomenon that shows you how to change your life and achieve real happiness. That is the name of the book, and on the front of the book, on the back it says, discover why unhappiness is something you choose for yourself. Life is not a competition. admitting fault is not defeat, what real freedom is, how to exist in the present, how you can be happy now, and so much more. Yes, there is so much more. I need to keep reading the book. I feel like I need to start it over. It's been a minute. I haven't read it since August. I got halfway through and then I stopped because the semester started. I need to go back, read my highlights, and continue because, wow. Highly recommend. Let me know what you guys thought about this episode. If you are listening to this anywhere that you listen to your podcast, if you liked this episode, please leave a 5-star review and follow so you don't miss another episode. And if you are watching this on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe. It helps a lot. And thank you guys so much for the love on the last video. Did really well, and I am excited to continue to do this with you. And catch me on live sometime because I'm doing it now. We will expand to other social media platforms at some point, but again, those baby steps. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a blessed week. Bye.